Ezekiel chapter 28. Wayahi davar Yahweh la'ilemor. And the word of Yahweh was to me, saying, Ben Adam, son of Adam, emoralin gid Thor, ko amar Adonai Yahweh. Say to the prince of Thor, thus Adonai Yahweh hath said, the prince or the ruler, that is. Yarn gaba halibka watomer elani, because thy heart was high, and thou hast said, I am a god. Mothab Elohim Yathabti Belib Yamim. The dwelling of a god. I am dwelling in the heart of the sea. Adam Elohel. And thou art a man, thou art Adam, and not a god. Watit tenelibka kalib Elohim. And thy heart is given like the heart of a god. Very interesting. Already he is saying, thou art an Adam, a man. Hinne hakam ata midaniel. Behold, thou art wise, more than Daniel. Kol sadum lo amamuka. Every shut up thing, every secret thing, they are not dark for thee. B'hokamataka ubitabu nataka ashita laka hail. In thy wisdom and in thy understanding thou hast made for thee wealth. Watash dhahab wakasab b'othrotaka. And thou hast made gold and silver in thy treasuries. B'rob hokumataka b'rekulataka hirbita helaka. In the abundance of thy wisdom, in thy traffic, thou hast multiplied thy wealth. Wayigabah levavaka behelaka. And thy heart hath become high by thy wealth, or in thy wealth. Lakin kohamar Adonai Yahweh. Therefore, thus Adonai Yahweh hath said, Yarnatitaka et levavaka kaleb Elohim. Because of thy giving thy heart like the heart of a god. Laken hinneni mevi alaka zarim arith egoyim. Therefore, behold me, one giving upon, or one bringing upon you, strangers, ruthless ones of the nations, or terrifying ones of the nations, Waheriku haravotam, and they shall take out or empty out their swords. Alayefe hokamataka, upon the beauty of thy wisdom. Wihilalu yifaataka, and they shall defile or profane thy splendor. Lashat yoriduka, to the pit they shall cause thee to go down. Wamata Mamote halal beleb yamim, and thou shalt die the deaths of the slain in the midst of seas, in the heart of seas. Hehamor tohamar Elohim ani lipne horgecha. Is it that sayingly thou shalt say, I am a god, before thy killers? Wahata adam Elohel biyad mahallalaka. And thou art Adam, a man, and not God, in the hand of one's slaying thee. So again, he calls him Adam, a man. Mote arelim tamut. The deaths of uncircumcised ones thou shalt die. Biyad zarim, in the hand of strangers. Ki hani dibarti noum Adonai Yahweh, because I have worded a declaration of Adonai Yahweh. Wayahi devar Yahweh lai le'amor, and the word of Yahweh was to me, saying, Ben Adam shahakina al melech Thor, son of Adam, lift up a lamentation over the king of Thor. Now here it says king, and earlier it said prince or ruler. But do understand that these words can be synonymous. Some are arguing, this is about the king, not the prince. That's a false dichotomy, because these different words can refer to the same ruler. So what follows is a passage that is a bit hard to interpret, and it seems to have been hard to interpret from ancient times. Although now it seems Christians are certain that this is talking about the history of Satan. Well, there's nothing actually in this that mentions Satan or the devil or any such thing. This is talking about the king of Thor, the ruler of Thor. Now, that's Tyre. Now, the Masoretic text is the Hebrew text that has the vowels on it, and the vowels were put on it in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, and it's probably the best preservation of the Hebrew text, but it's not always the best preservation of the Hebrew text, and so it's worthwhile to consider what earlier translations have and how they interpreted the consonantal Hebrew text before the Masoretic text was made, or before the vowels were put on the Masoretic text and it became the standard text of the Jews. So the Greek translation of the text of the Hebrew Bible was actually begun about 200 BC, and this passage was probably translated in the century following that. And it tells a different story to what the Masoretic text tells. The story that the Greek text tells is one of an Adam in Eden story, a Garden of Eden story where the man sins and is cast out. And this is being used as a metaphor for how the king of Thor is going to be destroyed by God because of his pride. But perhaps because this story as it was told here is a bit different to how it is told in Genesis, because it talks about gemstones, that the Adam is arrayed in gemstones like a priest. And those details are not found in Genesis. So perhaps because the story was a bit different, the interpretation of it was difficult, and perhaps that is why when the Masoretic vowels were put on it, it was understood to be a story about a cherub instead of a story about Adam. And so now we've got two very different accounts, one from the Masoretic text that most Christians are now aware of because their Bibles tend to go along with that, and one from the LXX, the Septuagint, the ancient Greek translation from about 100 BC. I say ancient because it's an old, but it's not ancient Greek. It's Koine Greek. So that's actually the earlier account, the Greek one, because it was translated about 200 BC, whereas the Masoretic text got its vowels about 600, 700, 800 AD, something like that. So we have two witnesses to how this passage should be interpreted. I think the better explanation is that it is about Adam. And so, as I'm reading this Masoretic text, I'll try and explain how the Greek text differs so that you can understand the two translations. So it says, V'hamarta lo ko hamar Adonai Yahweh, and thou shalt say to him, that is, to the king of Dor, thus Adonai Yahweh hath said, Ata hotem takanit, thou art sealing the proportion. Male hokma ukalil yopi, full of wisdom and complete of beauty. Bereden gan Elohim hayita, in Reden, the garden of God, thou wast. Kol heaven yakara mesukateka, odem pitada Yahalom Tarashish Shoham Yashapur Sapir Nopek Uvarakat Withahab. Every precious stone was thy covering. Odem, which could be ruby, Pitada, could be topaz, or Yahalom, could be diamond, Tarshish, could be jasper, Shoham, could be onyx, or Yashapur, that is usually understood to be jasper, Sapphire, sapphire, Nopuk, might be turquoise, or barakat, and maybe emerald, and gold. Maleket tupeka unkabeka, the work of thy tambourines or timbrels, and thy holes or sockets. So we're wondering whether these are musical instruments, or maybe what it's saying is where the jewels are set, being like a drum shape, like a tambourine shape, where the jewel goes in. Settings. Baka. So the work of thy tambourines and thy sockets was in thee. Biyom hibbaraka, Biyom hibbaraka. Not easy. Okay. Biyom hibbaraka, konanu. In the day of thy being created, they were set or prepared. Now, here the interpretations differ. The Masoretic text says, At kerub mimashaka hasokek, which means thou, kerub, thou an anointed kerub, the one covering. Right. Now, the Greek text translates it, instead of at kerub, it interprets it to et kerub, which means with the kerub. So you see, from the day thou wast created, thou wast with the kerub. You see that? Metatu kerub, with the kerub. Eter kase, I set thee. Enore hagioi teu, in the mountain, the holy mountain of God. And so it seems to lack, the Greek text seems to lack also this mimashaka hasokek addition to the description, the anointed one covering. So perhaps the Hebrew text did not have that at that stage, that perhaps these words were added to explain the passage sometime between 200 BC and the Masoretic text being pointed with vowels. Unatatika, and I have set thee. Bahar Kodesh Elohim Hayita, in the mountain of the holiness of God thou wast. Now people might say that, well, he did set a kerub in Eden, right? Well, he set a kerub in Eden after Adam sinned, right? And he was cast out. He set a kerub with a flaming sword to stop him coming back in, right? We don't know the function of the kerub being set in Eden before then, but if the Greek text is correct, Adam was with a kerub, maybe guarding him, even before he had sinned. Betoke avanesh hitahalakata, in the midst of stones of fire, thou walkedst about. Tamimahata bidarakaka, perfect thou wast in thy ways, miyom hibbarak, from the day of thy being created, adanimatah awalatabak, until iniquity or unrighteousness, injustice was found in thee. Injustice was found in whom? In the Garden of Eden. Was it not in Adam? Unrighteousness because he did not obey God. He ate from the fruit of the tree that God told him not to eat from. Beroberukulataka malutokaka hamas watehta. Here the Hebrew text has a phrase or a sentence, a clause there. In the abundance of thy merchandise, thy midst was filled with violence, and thou sinnedst. Which seems to be explanatory and may not have been a part of the original Hebrew text, because the Greek translation made hundreds of years earlier did not have this part. Well, now it's explanatory because Thor is full of merchandise, right? But the question is, was the kerub full of merchandise? Or was Adam full of merchandise? We don't know anything about Adam and the kerub's trading activities in the Garden of Eden. So this explanation that the fall is due to some dodgy trading or something, or pride because of merchandise, it's something we don't really understand much about from Genesis. And so it seems it may have been added here because it's trying to say that Thor's downfall is from its trading. Pride because of its trading, because it was such a prosperous seller of things, trader of things, that city. وَإِحَلَّكَ مِهَرْ إِلَوْهِيمْ وَهَبَّدْكَ كَرُوبْ حَسُّوكِكَ. All right. And I profaned thee from the mountain of the God, and I destroyed thee. And so that's sort of what happened to Adam, although not so dramatic. It doesn't say he was destroyed, but it does say that he will die because of this. And it says profane thee, which is in line with the idea that Adam was some kind of priest, some kind of sanctified one in God's holy garden. Now it says Kurub Hasokek. And well, that's what the Hebrew text says, which means covering cherub. So it's got that covering word again. The Greek text doesn't have covering here. And so it says Kurub Hasokek Mitoka Habanesh. Well, and so the Greek text interprets this as something like the Kurub has brought thee out or ruined thee from the midst of the stones of fire. And so we see now the Kurub's job is to take the Adam out of the garden of Eden. And then we know that he was stationed to protect the garden of Eden, to protect the way to the tree of life. So again, there's a difference here in the treatment of Kurub. The Greek text says that, as we can scroll down here, the Kurub has brought thee out of the midst of the stones of fire. The Kurub brought the Adam out of the midst of the stones of fire. But the Hebrew text seems to imply that I destroyed thee. Thou wast the Kurub. That is, the Masoretic text has interpreted it to mean that this is a judgment against the Kurub, which is quite interesting and something unheard of in the Bible, that there was a judgment on a Kurub in Genesis. The judgment was on man, wasn't it, as far as where we know. The only judgment we know of there was on man and his wife and the serpent. Thy heart was high by thy beauty. Shihata hokumataka aliyifataka. Thou hast corrupted thy wisdom on account of thy splendor. Upon ground, upon earth, I threw thee. To the ground I threw thee. Lifene malakim natatika. Before kings I have given thee. L'rahawabak. To look at thee. Merob awonaka. Be'ewel rekulataka. Hillalta miqdashaka. From the abundance of thy iniquities or depravities, in the injustice of thy merchandise, again, in the injustice of thy merchandise, that phrase here is actually in the Greek text, but not thought to be original. Thou hast profaned thy sanctuaries. And I brought thee I brought a fire from thy midst, it hath eaten thee. وَهَتَّنَكَ لَهَفَرْ عَلَى هَارِشْ, and I gave thee for ash upon the earth, لَعَيْنِ كُلِّ رُؤَكَ, before the eyes of all thy seers, all the ones seeing thee. كُلِّ يُدْعَكَ بَعَمِّيمْ, all the ones knowing thee among the nations, Shamamu alaka, are astonished upon thee, or were astonished upon thee. Ballahotahayita, terrors thou hast become. Wenaka ad-olam, and thou art not until unseen time. Now, if this was about Satan, well, he is presently a reality. He was a reality when this was prophesied in the centuries before Yeshua. He was a reality in the days of Yeshua. He is a reality now. He is yet to be cast out of heaven. Revelation 12 talks about a time when he will be, and he will no longer have access to the skies after that time. The Satan is still a reality. So if this was about Satan, how could it say that there is no being for him forever? And the word of Yahweh was to me, saying, Ben Adam, Shima Panaka, Elithidon, son of Adam, set thy faces to Thidon, Wihinave, Alaha, and prophesy thou over her. Wamarata, Koha Maradonai Yahweh, and thou shalt say, Thus Adonai Yahweh hath said, Hinnani alaka alaik Thidon, behold me against thee, O Thidon. Winnikabadati, betokek, and I shall glorify myself in thy midst. We are the Oki Hani Yahweh Bashoti Vah Shafatim, Winnikadashati Vah, and they shall know that I am Yahweh in my doing in thee judgments, and I shall sanctify myself in her, doing against her judgments, in my doing against her judgments, and I shall be sanctified in her, or I shall sanctify myself in her. The nif'al stem can be reflexive. I shall sanctify myself, or it can be passive. I shall be sanctified. And I will send in her devarwadam, pestilence and blood, b'huthotaha, in her streets, winifalal halal, b'tokah, b'herba'alaha misaviv, and the slain shall fall in her midst by the sword upon her from round about. We are the Oki Hani Yahweh, and they shall know that I am Yahweh. V'lo yihye od levet Yisrael silon mamahir v'koth makaib. And it shall not be, or there shall not be any more for the house of Yisrael a pricking briar or a thorn causing pain. Mikol sevivotam, from all their ones surrounding. Hashat imahotam, the ones treating them with contempt. We are the Oki Ani Adonai Yahweh, and they shall know that I am Adonai Yahweh. Ko Amara Adonai Yahweh. Thus Adonai Yahweh hath said, Beqabthi et bet Yisrael min ha'amim atrna forthuvam v'niqdashtivam le'ene hagoyim. In my gathering the house of Yisrael from the peoples, which they were scattered among them, also I shall sanctify myself by them before the eyes of the nations. V'yathavu ala hadamatam, and they shall sit or dwell upon their ground. Atranatati la'avdi le'Yakob, which I have given to my servant, to Yakob. V'yathavu alaha lavetah, and they shall dwell upon it for security. V'vanuvatim v'nata'okaramim, and they shall build houses, and they shall plant vineyards. V'yathavu lavetah, and they shall dwell for security. Ba'ashoti shafatim b'kol hashatim otam misvivotam. V'yada'o ki ani Yahweh Elohehem. In my effectuation of judgments, in all those treating them with contempt from round about them, and they shall know that I am Yahweh their God.